have been looking at, we left off at Vajra statement 6.1. And remember, we were talking about the rationale or the logic, yeah, of the rationale or the logic for reading, I feel, these two lines or these two statements side by side is very helpful. The 1.1 reminds us of the universal, timeless nature of the teachings. Because the teachings are the teachings that seek to communicate the fundamental nature of all phenomena. And since the fundamental nature of all phenomena does not change, cannot change, therefore, that nature and the teachings that indicate that nature remains available, remains universal, whether Buddhas appear or don't appear, whether we have the good fortune of meeting Buddhas or meeting Buddha's teachings or not. In a way, it's saying these teachings are still, can be discovered, is discoverable, can be realized, and then all the implications of that also, of how Buddhists, even as powerful as they are, Buddhists with their 10 powers and, lists like that, even they cannot change the nature of things, the fundamental nature of phenomena. And so that's 1.1. 6.1 then points to, in my mind, points to how, although the truth of 1.1 is the way it is, but to absorb the truths, the teachings, we should see the value and the blessings of those teachings and practices that we can receive from a living tradition. So that we're not trying to, I guess you could say, reinvent the wheel. There's something about sort of American creativity and American can-doism and rugged individuality, that emphasizes, us kind of learning this, and doing our own learning, which is very admirable. And that style is also spreading, across the world. It's very appealing. But all things should be kept in balance, I think, in check. And I think 6.1 is to argue for, to point out the value of receiving these teachings and practices that have withstood the test of time. That's one implication. I think Nathan, I think, shared a study among, in a totally different context about how those things, that are still around, means that they have a particular value and that they are more effective. So So if we look at 6.1, it says, he taught that the Dharma that is transmitted by a lineage is profound and marvelous. So what is, so what is he, what might he be responding to, when he said this? Well, he's responding to, and above that statement in bold, now page 517, it says, some claim that dharmas that appear without transmission lineage and earth teachings, space teachings, and treasure teachings to be profound and amazing. So now Chudra, a few hundred years later, he elaborates in his commentary. So the first section of his commentary, he says, yeah, there are these traditions, called the four children of Bekar, like the wood teachings, the 8 limbs of the sustenance and purification ceremony that emerged from the wooden pillar, the sky teachings of the 18 Tantra sections that fell upon the house of King Za, and other are perfect in word and meaning, but since they lack the Guru transmission, they do not bring forth the result. And so he says, even if, they are perfect in word and meaning, but if they lack the Guru transmission, meaning, again, if it has not been, I think Guru transmission here, for me at least, I don't feel I need to read it so literally as if you don't learn it from a Guru. Here, I think it's really pointing that, no matter how profound and how beautiful those words, if those words have not been put into practice and brought forth results, then it lacks an important element. Yeah? It lacks an important element insofar as they are teachings for us to be applied and to transform. It's sort of like how we would say today, talk is cheap. Talk is cheap. And in this day and time, I have to say, like one of the great things about technology is that it can reach so many people, right? It can reach so many people. So here we are, right? But I should also say, like talk is cheap. If I sound good, I sound good about 2 hours, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, or maybe an hour. You don't really know, You don't really know to what extent, the talk that I'm talking has some basis in my experience of these teachings, and what kind of impact these teachings have, if I've experienced them, in the way, I live my life. That is so true, of so many kind of public faces of the Dharma, or for that matter, any spiritual tradition. Technology has created lots of superstars. But there's something to be said about the conservative element of, until you really get to see this person in and outside of the context of their public persona, you don't know, if those words actually have, in the language used here, the blessings of the lineage. I'm not even talking about, people that use these teachings to manipulate others. I mean, that's already too far gone that it's meaningless to talk about those types of people. I'm not even talking about charlatans who know they are charlatans. That's not the real problem. It's charlatans who don't know that we are charlatans and think that, oh, what I'm saying, has touched so many people. Here it actually says, like, if it is not really backed up with you having experienced them, the superficial good that it seems to be bringing is not going to be lasting. We don't say this, I'm not saying this to encourage you to go dig for dirt or, to go kind of judge, this or that person. But I'm saying this because to me, this is what this statement is also saying, Like, it's not enough that teachings sound profound on paper or in sound bites. It's not enough that teachings, are marvelous. It's not enough that these teachings might have a, amazing story how they came about, like, oh, it fell from the sky. Oh, I was digging one day and I found this scroll. Exciting, things. But it's saying that it's not enough, If what you want to do with them is to really experience the effects of these words, of these teachings, then 6.1 is saying it's much better that it came from a line of people who have digested these teachings, who have experienced the fruits of these teachings. And when we can find things like that, they are so precious. They are so markedly different. So from this perspective, we can say, even those who seemingly have a lineage, like I seemingly have a lineage, I received the transmission of, like, the not the commentary. I have received teachings, but I've not received literal reading transmission of this commentary. But I have the transmission for the Vajra statement from none other than Khenchen Rinpoche, which is, like, in modern times, he's like one of the key people that teaches everything that he teaches, comes from Gongchik. But for 20 years, I've never really heard him saying the word Gongchik. He just taught it, Anyway, so in a formal sense, I have the transmission. But this statement, again, it's not just talking about this kind of formal transmission, this formal sense of having a lineage. This is really, to me, it's really talking about lineage in the more kind of essential level of lineage. So in that sense, if you really get down to the gist of this statement, it's talking about, it's not so much talking about, oh, then what you have is kind of useless, but it's more talking about know that there does exist the possibility of receiving a teaching, receiving a practice from someone who has really experienced this, who received it from someone who has really experienced this and seen the fruits of this practice. And that when you meet some transmission like that, when you meet some transmission like that, the effect that it's going to have is going to be so different from those who just have the words, just have the word transmission, and much less those who don't even have the word transmission. So in part, 6.1 is talking about that. But by Chodra's time, I think he's also needing to address some other issues that have come up between the time of the composition of the Gongchik and a few hundred years later, his time. So then he needs to address the issue of dharmas, both those who advocate the authenticity of dharmas and those who object to all dharmas as inauthentic. So he has to basically address those questions, those issues. Himself, as I said, he practiced dharmas. And he himself, I believe, also discovered some dharmas, although not major. But his grandfather was a third a dharma discoverer. And some actually consider him to be like a reincarnation of his grandfather, which is Rinchen Phuntsok, the 17th throne holder, who discovered the Yangzab. Those of you who know those names. So he has to, talk about this issue. And so in part, his commentary is addressing these things. Then the notes in 6.1, Sobish, is primarily addressing those issues. He wants to say that, no, this is not a blanket rejection of dharmas, since we know Rigzin Chodra himself pay attention to dharmas, include dharmas in his practice, in his transmissions. And then Sobish says, he is the gist, of Sobish's notes is saying he's striking a middle ground between any and all dharmas are good, authentic, and in fact, much better. So that's the extreme. Dharmas are much better than the regular teachings of the Buddha. And today, there are many people who kind of have that attitude. Dharmas is much better than the what they call the long transmission. They say the long transmission have become watered down, have become more and more corrupt. So the power that used to be there is now gone. So then they say dharmas have a short lineage, so everyone, right, that holds it has held it purely, and so now it comes to you in a very pure way. Yeah, so that's one reason why people say dharmas are more powerful. And of course, dharmas are also very exciting. Somebody pulled it out of a rock, somebody picked up a stone, crushed it open, and then there's some scrolls that were written in Dakini language and then deciphered and blah, 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 all of that. So on the one hand, there are those who said, Chodra's time and our time, dharmas are much more profound. Dharmas have way more blessings because the line is so pure, so direct, so short. Then on the other hand are those who say, dharmas are fake, completely. This is all people's, creation. And then they say, oh, Guru Rinpoche hid it, all this is nonsense. But Chodra, has to take a different position that basically say, there are a lot of authentic dharmas. And then for those, of course, they are good. But then there are also inauthentic dharmas. So these notes are very long, but basically explaining that. But if we look at the notes in Sobish and look for those places where he quotes Dorshema or he quotes Rinjangma, I think if we look at places where he directly quotes or he talks about Dorshema or Rinjangma talking about that Vajra statement, then there we can see the earliest layer of reading the Gongchik that has little to do with defending Gongchik, arguing for Gongchik, it's less of that business going on. As I say, Chodra is doing two things. One is to teach, the practice implications of Gongchik, and two is to fend off criticisms and debates against Gongchik. Right? But Rinjangma and Dorshema, in that early period, wasn't concerned about these debates. And so I think if we, in reading this big book, under the notes section, it helps, to go kind of pay attention more to when Sobish is quoting directly or giving you some information of what the Rinjangma and the Dorshema has to say about this Vajra statement. That I feel has more to do with, how do we, what are the practice implications of that Vajra statement, independent of polemics, independent of debates, independent of arguments. So look at that first, I would say. Then, of course, if you know how to study debates, as last time we met, I said, if you know how to study these debates, these disputations, it can help to clear your own confusion. But if you don't know how to study these debates, then it becomes sectarian business. Then it becomes fundamentally, mine is better, yours is better minus one. Rather than, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, rather than it should be, mine is the best footnote for me. Yours is the best footnote for you. He says, His Holiness, very, he says, it's okay to say that mine is the best, but for me. Yours is the best for you. He says, it makes no sense if you say, he says, it's a big fault if you say, mine is the best, therefore everyone has to follow this. He says, that's a great fault. Equally, he says, it makes no sense to say, yours is the best. Meaning, yours is the best, mine is not so good. Then he said, that makes no sense. If theirs is the best, of course you should take what's the best. He says, that also makes no sense. He says, people who say, oh, my own tradition is not so good, their tradition is better. Then he says, either you're not sincere in saying that, or you're stupid. Why would you want the second best? If you think they have the best, then you should adopt theirs. Or maybe you're insincere. You're just pretending, oh, yours is so good, yours is so good, oh, mine is not so good. He said, that's also not true, makes no sense. So you have to say, you have to not just say, you have to really see how mine is the best for me. Yours is the best for you. So in the notes, let's see. So if we look at notes for 6.1, quotes from Dorshema. It says on page 520, I have realized this Dharma of mine through a practice done by myself. Therefore, this Dharma does not have a lineage. So during the 12th century, there were people like that who basically want to say, I got this myself. And it's good, So here it says, and Dorshima say, but this does not agree with the Buddha's instructions because his instructions do not contain it. And so he says, then if you actually look at some of these teachings, they do not agree with the Buddha's instructions. The Buddha's teachings don't have these things. But these people are actually proud of that. They say, oh, yeah, it's not in there because I understand this through my own practice. So this arguing of the dangers of, the individual subjectivity and say, I don't need anything else, I just, everything I realize, this is how it is. So it's saying like, no, you can't do that. As much as like I say, like in another context, I said the Buddha gave these instructions, gave these teachings, but you have to recognize also that when you put these teachings into practice, it is your own process that you need to take responsibility for. You need to be honest about, how this is working, because your process is going to be different from the general process taught or explained in the text. But at the same time, it doesn't mean like, oh, just myself as the reference point. So this is what Dorshema is saying. So Rinzhen Changchup, Rinzhangma also say, so these people, they say, I have these marvelous, profound dharmas that others do not have. And they say proudly, See, part of what was going on also in the 12th century is that there's an economic incentive to these things, which I would say is true to this day. These individuals, these teachers who say, I have something new, right? I'm not saying that it's always motivated by, material gain. But there is an element of that. And in the 12th century, even more so. Today, we find it very strange. And then Dharma centers are also very self-conscious. And I can tell you, I myself, very self-conscious. Whenever the tradition of saying, oh, you make an offering to receive something, I say, oh, I don't like to say that, and then we're all very, kind of like skirt around that issue. But in the 11th, 12th century, during that time, like for real, people paid money for teachings. This is not just like capitalism today. My progressive friends like to say, oh, that's all capitalism. No, you go back and you look, Marpa had to, accumulate so much wealth that he took with him in sacks of gold to go down to India in order to exchange the teachings. And he wasn't the only one. And then there were these like masters that came from India and Nepal and came up to southern Tibet. Again and again, you see how when the Tibetans go and say, "Oh, can you give me these teachings?" The gurus will say, "Okay, what do you have for in return? What do you have to give in return?" So that no apologies in these historical sources. Absolutely no apologies. So they didn't have this weird relationship with wealth and the exchange of wealth for Dharma. So here, and partly because of that, right, there were a lot of people in the 11th, 12th century when this Dharma phenomenon started to become more and more public and more accepted. there were a lot of people going around saying, I have this special thing, you know, you want it? This is how much it is. Likewise today, you know, there are some that are less shy about it, you know. So whether they call it registration or, you know, special program, certification, at the end of this, I will call you a lama, you know, I will call you a certified Dharma teacher, blah, blah, blah. Somebody once said to me, you know, it's like, you know, figure out how to teach teachers. Then, you know, that's where your income source is going to come from. So don't teach yoga. You know, figure out how to certify other people to teach yoga. Or like my business, they say, don't sell retail. Figure out how to sell wholesale. Then that's when the big money comes. So there's this economic incentive too, you know, in the 11th, 12th century. And so that's why a lot of people were going around saying, I have this special Dharma, I have this special Dharma. So it's against that kind of a background. And that background, I would say, is relevant to us today as well. Both East and West, there's a lot of these individuals. Some more explicitly repackaging the Dharma and saying, oh, this is something new. And so, you know, to join, to participate, you know, you have to give this much, this, that, you know. And then some less explicit. And they all often, you know, sound really good. 6-1 is saying, you know, slow down, you know. There are some details given in these early commentaries as to what is the problem with things like the 4 children of Pekar teachings. There it says, then there's 521. Dojé Sharap says, a lesser monk of the assembly of Shangsharwa, one Kagyu master, was lured away by, quote, a white man coming down from the sky, who said, listen to my teaching, I will lead you to the sky. A white guy. A white guy turned up in Tibet. At least they didn't turn up as the conquistador, you know. Then the 4 children of Pekar, they teach this. And Pehar is actually a Dharmapala. But in this early period, you know, there were people claiming that they have some special Dharma from Pehar. There's one group we know they actually, you know, was around in the 11th, 12th century. And apparently this is what they teach. There is absolutely no connection between thoughts and things. Neither killer nor killed suffer any effect. Results do not arise from causes. Understanding that there is no virtue nor non-virtue, one attains celestial life. Yeah, so these types of teachings. Some details given by in 522. You say, so the commentator, early commentators say there are 2 requirements to say that you have the transmission. One, the teaching transmission is uninterrupted down to the root guru. That is, there is an unbroken line of gurus who have received the explanation of such teachings from their own gurus to the time of the originator of a teaching, such as Nagarjuna. 2, The continuity of authorization and reasoning is uninterrupted, where authorization refers to the reading transmission of the text, the lung, and reasoning to its explanation by way of logic. So meaning understanding also needs to be uninterrupted. So by those standards, as I said to you, as I confessed to you, I don't have all of that. I have certain reading transmission. I have certain, reasoning transmission. And yes, I believe I received it from individuals who have this uninterrupted, but I don't have all of it, So again, this statement need not be, have good, don't have bad. Completely like that. It's just saying, it can be so much more powerful. And your ability to meet something powerful like that is possible. You can aspire to meet something like that, someone like that. And don't so easily get, lured away by, this white man that, came down from the sky. Some people say, when Jesus died, was crucified in the Middle East, in Palestine, then he appeared in the New World, according to the Mormons. He descended from the sky in the Americas. So maybe, one of his emanations went to Tibet, the white guy from the sky. Who knows? And I'll take you to the celestial realms, I'll take you to the heavens. For a transmitted Dharma, 3 requirements, 523. Its transmission of empowerment should not have declined. So this is in the Vajrayana. Its confidence of blessing should not have vanished. So, people need to have the conviction that this blessing is there. Its vital points of practice should not have been perverted. So this is the best scenario. So any questions, comments on these pages here? There's quite a few pages that Sovish, because there's a lot of scholarly, like modern scholarly discussions about all these issues related to Dharmas and those who were against Dharmas, those who were for Dharmas. So then again, clearly Sakya Pandita rejected Dharmas. So on page 526, Sapans composed Dharma, right? Composed by so general tradition, they reject current Sakyapas excess. But as far as Sakya Pandita is concerned, Dharmas mostly, if not completely, fabricated. As for Sakya Pandita, anything that is, appeared in Tibet with no Sanskrit original, he rejects, basically. His family is the Kon lineage, the Kon descendants, like biological family is the Kon lineage. And the Kon lineage in the 12th century, they have one practice of Vajakilaya that came down to them from the early period. It's like a family specialty. And so this belongs to the early period when Guru Rinpoche came to Tibet. So Vajakilaya. And Vajakilaya, this practice, this system of Tantra, did not exist in the Sarmations, meaning like when Marpa and when Sakya family people went to Nepal to bring back among all these tantric texts, Chakra Samara, Guhya Samaja, Kala Chakra, Chatupita, less known, Mahamaya, all these, right? There was no Vajakilaya. So Vajakilaya is called, an old translation tantra. So it was said that Sakya Pandita was very uncomfortable with this, because his standards is, if I don't see the original Sanskrit, then it's suspicious. But then his family's forte is Vajakilaya, So it said that he had some questions about the authenticity of the Vajakilaya. He was very uncomfortable with the fact that his family main practice was something that he could not find the Sanskrit original. So it stressed him, it says, quite a bit. Then apparently, according to, I forgot exactly where, apparently he said he found the Sanskrit origins finally hidden in a pillar, either at Samye Monastery, the earliest monastery built in Tibet, or in the Jokang, one of the earliest temples built to house the sacred image of Shakyamuni in Lhasa. And so it is said that he found hidden inside the pillar the original Sanskrit that then satisfied his criteria. That everything we practice needs to have written in Sanskrit. And so, of course, then for him, termas are completely unacceptable. So questions, comments?
Dr. Lai?
Yes.
Fabiola here.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it's related to something what you said. And a couple of years ago, I was listening to this scholar, self-called secular Buddhist, saying something like that even rebirth could be questioned because maybe it was more of a cultural component. I mean, to me, it sounded just weird to take rebirth out of the Buddhist equation. But it made me, when you were talking now about scholarly debates, that those things are going on now with some people in inside meditation or secular Buddhism. And somehow I've heard just some scholars trying to justify rebirth away from the context. I don't know if you had any thoughts about that.
To me, that's a little, maybe slightly different. I can see how you're making that connection. To me, I think here the concern is more, yes, of course, there are scholars, and then there are those part within the Buddhist community who are reading the scholars, and then I would say kind of cherry picking from what the scholars are saying to kind of reinforce what they have already kind of decided, that is true or not true.
Yes.
Likewise, that you have people some very few, but some still I've seen, that they cherry pick from what the scholars are saying. And then they will say, see, it shows, this is not true. So like in Tibet, I know some people now they are starting to read like Western scholarship. And then they will say, see, they show, or they prove, supposedly show that Dharmas are creative works of Tibetans. So, this is not true. Dharmas are not authentic. But of course, Western scholarship or modern scholarship is not judging Dharmas as inauthentic. It's just showing the process of how Dharmas came to be. And they will subject the same kind of analysis to supposed sutras of the Buddha. So like if I would say, if you use like this the criteria of analysis of modern scholars to show that Dharmas are inauthentic, then you have to go a step back. Tantras are inauthentic. Then you have to go a step back. Mahayana sutras are inauthentic. Then you have to go a step back. Even Pali sources are only a few hundred years later, therefore inauthentic. Then you're left with nothing.
Yeah,
I mean, really, in the end, how the heck do we know what Shakyamuni said or did not say? There's absolutely no way to even prove beyond doubt that the Four Noble Truths came out of Siddhartha's mouth by those standards. So I think it's disingenuous when a certain spiritual figure who is now coming up with his own interpretation of the Dharma, selectively using this kind of logic. And it's like, wait. Let's take this, to its full extent. Then you're left with nothing.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Now, the issue of rebirth, the way I approach it is I say, if you ask me, again, I don't have a way to prove to you exactly. Yeah, I don't have a way to prove to you and say, here, look, rebirth is real. But if you want to say, oh, the historical Buddha never really taught rebirth, then I can tell you I've looked at the scholarship and that's nonsense. Meaning, those who say that he taught and those who say that he did not taught, the same rigorous burden of proof, if you apply to both, then those who say that he taught has more standing on their side than those who say he did not teach about rebirth. Then for those who say, oh, Buddha, Siddhartha taught about rebirth because, he was part of his times and people during his time believed these things, Then now, actually, what are we saying? We are saying, actually, Siddhartha wasn't a Buddha. He was just some guy who was really smart. He was also confined by some silly beliefs that his culture believed in. So he also went along with it. Well, if we say that, then there's nothing else to say. Why even bother to call yourself Buddhist at this point? Just do whatever you want, Which is fine. I mean, this is not out of contempt that I say do whatever you want. I'm just saying park somewhere else, Just go park somewhere else. It's like those signs, parking only for Irish or parking only for, 49ers fans or whatever, Like, you just go park somewhere else. Then you conduct your business somewhere else, Don't park here and say, oh, actually, and yeah. So this is the concern here, I think, with 6.1. Don't park yourself at the Buddhist parking lot and then say, oh, actually, I have a special Dharma nobody knows. I know the Buddha, like all you guys got it wrong. It's like, huh? But don't take this, on the basis of faith either. Investigate and see.
Thank you, Dr. Lyon. You know, there's, I mean, the subject of rebirth, right, is for us in the West that maybe didn't grow up with that idea is different. But you've said sometimes in Kagyu Sangha and Open Sangha how it opens up space. So even if
Yes.
the logical mind cannot figure it out, to me, I know that it does open up a lot of space. And if
Mhm.
it's like, if there was no rebirth, you know,
Yes.
maybe I might as well have chosen another religion because it somehow
Yes.
makes sense within that, right?
Yeah.
Within that logic.
Yeah. My approach to things like rebirth is not to argue, is it real? It is not real. But again, to see how does it work when you suspend disbelief? What does it do? It opens up a lot more space. Because in many ways, if you really take the seriously, you know, like Buddhist practice, like intensive meditation, it can get very claustrophobic. You know, Goenkaji's movement, the 10-day Vipassana course, right, has become very popular all around the world, and it has helped many people. But what is not being so commonly reported is also all these experiences of psychosis that is, you know, that comes up when people go for these retreats. They're not reported. I'm not saying there's a lot, but what I'm saying is that I think often these are people without the cultural context and turning up to do the practice, and it gets so intense, you know, but there's no space for that intensity. Then of course it will trigger psychosis, you know, especially if there's already an underlying. They do their best. I know they do their best, you know, to try to screen out people, and they ask, you know, and sometimes people lie, you know, because they think this is going to fix their problems. Then it triggers that. But in the traditional teachings, it says, you know, that the intensity of looking at the mind is such an important, but as well as dangerous work, that if you don't have the dana, the parami, the strength of generosity, the strength of moral ethics to ground you, and you go directly into this kind of intensity, it will disrupt your life, you know. It will make things all go upside down. So my opinion is like, you know, I don't require people to literally believe in rebirth, but I also say to people, you know, don't throw it out, you know, because you think, oh, that's just some silly thing that Indians believe in, you know. Tanisaru Bhikkhu very convincingly shows, you know, from a scholarly point of view, because like this idea that, you know, Buddha Shakyamuni taught rebirth because people in his time, they all believed that. He's like, that's not true. In fact, Indian people did not universally subscribe to, you know, rebirth, reincarnation, whatever you want to call that, until a later period. During the Buddha's time, there were many other views that were competing for the, you know, intellectual faith market, so to say, of India. So in early Buddhist texts, they talk about, you know, all these different positions. So in Buddhist tradition, they talk about the 6 non-Buddhist positions about causation. Everything came from one cause. This is the God-based system, what we call the God-based. Everything do not have causation. Meaningless universe. Everything is accidental. That's corresponds more to our kind of secularist, materialist view. And then everything is fated. So there are all these, you know, different positions summarized in Buddhist texts regarding what other people believed during the Buddha's time. then not all of them accepted rebirth and karma. And so the Buddha very clearly articulated his understanding of karma. That is different from the Hindu theories. So he did not just like, oh, well, that's what people believe, I will just go along with it. No. Also, many examples when people came to him and say things that say, I don't believe in this many lifetime things, and he used reasoning to reason with them why it's helpful to keep rebirth and karma and to operate within that understanding. He did not say, well, it is the truth because I have seen it, and so you need to believe it. It didn't say that. Now it's different, I think, from like, the way that, so I want to say, because I know your interest. Then when a certain set of Buddhist practice have been taken and adapted to meet the needs of a different context, so in other words, like mindfulness for, regular well-being, as everybody can agree on and sign up, for. Maybe in those things, it's not necessary to talk about rebirth or not. I think that's fine. Again, it's when the people who park themselves in the Buddhist parking lot. That's my pet peeve. If you park yourself in the Buddhist parking lot, please, you can't have your cake and eat it too. Like, have some integrity. If you're ballsy enough to do your own thing, park somewhere else, and that's fine. You can help people that way. Likewise, there are some people, because they're so, this is the problem. I think lack of understanding, then get involved in something and then it turns bad. So recently, a lot of like skeletons in the closets of Vajrayana communities and Vajrayana lamas, turn up, right? So now there are these Vajrayana people, Vajrayana teachers in the West that says, oh, we are now Vajrayana, no need lineage. We have to reimagine lineage. Say, well, Vajrayana with no lineage? I don't know. You have to park yourself somewhere else. You can't have your cake and eat it too. Bake another cake, We don't all have to eat the same cake. And so in full disclosure, I'm a conservative of sorts, not in the American sense of that word these days. I'm a conservative of sorts when it comes to the Dharma. But at the same time, I would like to believe that it's not a, like because it says so, that kind of conservatism. But I do believe in trying our best to maintain the integrity of each system. I'm not bragging, but I'm just giving one example. When I was teaching graduates, and when I was in graduate school, the last couple of years of graduate school, my graduate advisor was on sabbatical. And so they hired me to cover some of his classes. And then they also stuck me with a class that he never taught, but they needed someone to teach. So that the people who usually teach it, even though they're not on sabbatical, they can take a break from it. It's the class that nobody really wants to teach, because you're lecturing to 300-400 students. You work with 6 teaching assistants. It's called Introduction to Eastern Religions, right? Everything under the sky that is not Western, you're expected to cover in 13 weeks. Luckily, I'm kind of an exhibitionist. I do pretty well talking to 400 people. In graduate school, I saw that very clearly, so I'll reveal more of myself. In graduate school, I have a hard time talking in class when there's only 14 people. And I'm one of the students. I barely say anything in those graduate classes. Then you put me in a room of 400 students. I'm quite a performer, like a televangelist. People were quite excited, to go to my lectures, because I get into this performance mode. So anyway, so when they figured out that I was good at teaching this particular course to 300-400 people, then they kept having me do it, because everybody hated teaching that. And I loved it, because then I didn't have to do any grading. All my TAs, I hated grading. So then my TAs, did all the grading. And I just went in to perform. So anyway, the word every semester is that it doesn't take long when the students will start having a debate and a bet among themselves. If Dr. Lai was Hindu or Taoist, yeah, or Buddhist, and they will have these very animated debates and even bets in some cases. And that is because, I felt very strongly, even beyond the Buddhist context, that the way to be non-sectarian is not to mix everything up and show how, they are all the same. No, they're not the same. The way to be non-sectarian is to present each of the systems in their distinct characteristics, and to show what is important to them and why it's important to them, and show the inner logic and integrity of the systems that I have to teach. And to teach it in such a way, and it's, I was flattered that students thought, I subscribe to that set of beliefs. Yeah. So this is how I feel about, so then even within Buddhist things, and within Tibetan Buddhism, and even within just Kagyu, each Kagyu great master have a slightly different, nuance on what they are doing. And we do not do a service when we just throw them all together and say, they're all the same. As much as, I personally, very much subscribe to Gongchik, single intention, but that single intention doesn't mean, everything is the same. Every system, has its own specialty, its own unique flavor. And you want to preserve that. So this is, in a way, you could say, a defense and argument for diversity. And we know, in any forest, in any agriculture, single species, single crop is what's causing the most problem. A healthy forest is a forest that has as many different species as possible. That's what makes the forest strong. But it doesn't mean, the banana plant needs to figure out how to be a guava plant, and the guava plant needs to figure out how to be an oak tree. It just means that each of you need to take good care of the particular system that is most, speaks to you most powerfully. Then without apologies, you propagate that. You advocate that. But again, it is the best for me. Then you have to say to others, so you need to know what is the best for you. So anyway, I think 6-1, I think that's enough, there's so much in this commentary and in the notes that you could, follow the trail and go look up all the references, and it's wonderful, if you have that kind of, inspired in that way. But we don't want to get too bogged down, right? So now, on Monday, we will go to Budget Statement 1.2. Budget Statement 1.2. Then a reminder, this Sunday, there is the Guru Puja with talk offering, with feast offering, and we'll start at 9. Probably go till 11 because I need to also explain the Ghana Chakra part, which we have not done yet so far. So if you can join us on Sunday, please do. And also invite other people who you think have familiarity with Kyopa Jikden Sumgun and wants to do this practice together. Then some of you I might see tomorrow. Maybe you all know, maybe you don't. But Casa Tibet in Mexico City is hosting the 3rd of these virtual empowerments of Panashalari. And so I will be doing that with them tomorrow, the whole of tomorrow afternoon. Well, for me, it will start in the morning. I have to do, as I say, with empowerments. If I spend 5 hours with the actual program, then prior to that is at least another 5 hours. So I have to start tomorrow morning and do the preparations, self-empowerment, all that. And then it will be, I think from my time is 2 to 7 p.m. This is my schedule tomorrow. And then Sunday we have Guru Puja in the morning. And then Monday we'll be back with Gongchik and Guru Puja. Okay, that's it.
Gracias.
Ta-ta.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Hasta pronto.
Gracias.
Thank you, gracias.